a former one and a current one. I think it is unnecessary.
Senator, he calls it bad manners, and he says, man, it's just bringing us and stooping us so low. Is the issue between the two leaders actually impacting the nation?
First, Eric, I think what is actually happening in what you're terming as a discord is because the two leaders are looking at issues from different points. This is also a moment whereby we look at what former heads of state do. In Africa, for a very long time, people looked at it like for any ordinary head of state in Africa, the only way they would be removed from office was by way of their own natural death. But consequently, we actually saw peaceful handing over of power, of which in Kenya that has happened. But at this point, I think someone like former President Uhuru needs to realize handing over of power at Kasarani was not just about giving that sword and that is it. It actually takes time. And he now needs to realize that President Ruto is no longer his deputy. He's now the commander-in-chief, is the chairman of the National Security Council in this country. And when he gives allegations of the former president funding Azimio demonstrations, those allegations should not be taken lightly. I even saw the former head of state, Uhuru Kenyatta, come and defend his son. His son is a young person like myself who I would have thought would have spoken for himself, and if it goes far, hire a lawyer to speak for himself, on his behalf. If the president is protecting his family, President Ruto, if the former president Kenyatta is protecting his family, President Ruto has a right to also protect the families of Kenyans. Who will protect such people if we entertain such a kind of behavior where we have largely seen Azimio leaders failing to recognize that we now have a president in office? If they actually recognized the office of the president, we wouldn't be having what we are seeing now.
But I think you're mixing issues here without showing us how they come to mix.
Look at this.
The former president went to Kasarani, handed over power. And the former president, as he said the other day, hasn't since then been in the public limelight at all.
But recently,
openly commenting about what's happening in the country, or even participating in any open public meeting, demonstration and such.
And I have mentioned this, Eric, the former president, and we have always said no one is actually above the law, be it a former president, current president, any ordinary person. Me, as a senator, I'm not above the law. When a former president comes to address a press conference, in his press conference, he even wants to lecture the current president on how he should behave. That's why I actually said this is a moment to reflect back on what former heads of state should be doing. I think in 2005, we had former heads of state commit in the African Union, commit to uphold certain ideals, which was as a result of them actually handing over power peacefully. And I said we've had several of those instances, and the same happened to Kenya. But in Kenya, it's quite different. When former President Kenyatta handed over power to Ruto, he actually didn't quit the scene. And President Ruto has made allegations, him as a chair of the National Security Council, of the former president funding Azimio maandamano. That's not a statement that should be taken lightly. If former President Uhuru Kenyatta wants to be treated with the respect other former heads of state are given, I think let him carry on with the peace envoy role. And as a peace envoy, I expect him to call out the violent and destructive maandamano this country has been witnessing in the last 3 weeks. Eric, I was sitting in the bipartisan talks. We have always been bending to accommodate Azimio, but they keep shifting goalposts, issuing new ultimatums. And the president, Ruto, he's willing to talk to anyone. I don't think Right Honorable Raila Odinga can't call President Ruto and talk to him, that it has to take a Tanzanian to come and make the two of them talk. For me, Eric, Especially, we would rather even argue in the boardroom, in the bipartisan talk, whereby I get a heart attack, than seeing young people like me die in the street
because of Maandamano.
Because of Maandamano.
We'll go into the negotiations a bit later in the conversation. I just want to bring in Gabriel at this point. He says bad manners. He says